And so I want to get right into the Word tonight. And as I said, we're continuing our verse-by-verse teaching from the Book of Ephesians. We're in chapter 6, and we got through the first 4 verses. Chapter 5 wrapped up the responsibility of husbands and wives, and in the first few verses of chapter 6 was fathers with their children. And how we're to raise them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, and not to provoke our kids to wrath. But remember, it starts off with children, obey your parents in the Lord, honor your parents, which is the first commandment and promise. And we saw that with the husband and wife. It says, here's a responsibility for you wives, but here's a responsibility for you husbands. And if you husbands do what you ought to be doing, then the wife can be doing what she should be doing in perfect harmony. But if you get that out of kilter, it doesn't work real well. Same thing with the kid relationship. You can say, you're supposed to honor me and be a tyrant, and they're going to have the attitude, the day I turn 18, I'm out the door. And they're already out the door in their heart. And so those were good lessons. And it moves on, and this is the last part of the Christian living part of the teaching of Ephesians. Now, if you recall, we told you the first 3 chapters were chapters that were dealing with doctrine. And then it moved over to the practical, the Christian living. And this is going to wrap up the Christian living in this last chapter, and then it's going to transition into having taught you about walking by faith, living your life out practically. Here's what to do and the power to do that. So let's see if we can't get through. It's a lot to do, but let's just jump in right there at verse number 5, where it says, "Bondservants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in sincerity of heart as to Christ." Bondservants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh. So he's not talking about your master in heaven, the Lord. He's talking about your earthly rulers. In that day, he's talking about bondservants. You still had people who would get into debt, and they would enter into bond service with a master. You can call them a slave, but they were. It's a voluntary. It's not slavery like we think of in America, people, being taken from their homes in one country and brought over. This was fellow countrymen who would have debt, and in order to pay off their debt, they would enlist, so to speak, into bond service, which made them a slave or a bond servant. There was a bond, and you had to work off that bond. You had to pay off that bond. And so you got room and board, and when you worked off the debt that you owed, you'd be released. And so it was for a period of time voluntary service. Now there are people who decided in ancient times that they wanted to remain. Because they might get married during that time. They might be in bond service for years, and they might get married and have children. Well, according to the rules, the law, the wife and the kids are the master of the house, because she was in bond service herself, and then the kids, stay with the mom and so on. And so a guy that would pay off his debt and say, okay, you're free, but wife and kiddos are staying here in the house, they'd be like, well, you're a good master, and I love my family. I want to continue to serve you voluntarily. And that was where they would put their earlobe up against a doorpost, and they would get it pierced, and that was the symbol of perpetual bond service. And so that's part of that history of piercings, and it was, that, and especially the pagan aspect of some people would put a earring in their ear as a symbol of their pagan worship. And that's what's forbidden in the Scripture. But people would choose to do that. So if you saw somebody with a particular type of, I don't know what it was, what it would look like, but It might have just been the hole or something. Some people get those big old holes. Maybe it was like that. But I don't know what it was, but they would pierce through their ear. And, maybe it looked like a cow with a little tag on there. I don't know. But that's just what that is, okay? And so let me read this to you from the Amplified. This is the Amplified Classic, not the New Amplified. It says, servants, slaves, be obedient to those who are your physical masters, having respect to them and eager concern to please them, in singleness of motive and with all your heart, as service to Christ Himself. Now, what I want you to think of is in modern times, we don't have people that are bond servants, but we do have people that are what we would call employees. And you can apply the truth here to somebody that you are working for, laboring for, and the heart you're supposed to have in that. And so we could say servants, slaves, we could say employees, be obedient to those who are your physical master or your physical or natural boss, your employer. And have respect for them and be with eager concern to please them. Now, this can be a challenge if that master is not a good master, but it doesn't exempt you because you're supposed to work for them with an eagerness to please them, even if they're mean, even if they're ornery, if they're unfair. It doesn't exempt. And this is why I say I don't know if I'll get through, because this is a big message for us. That God is calling us. This is the last thing He had to say about practical living. And it speaks to the testimony that Linda shared on Sunday morning. Someone watched her life, and I believe it was in the setting of the store where you were working, at the shoe factory, but it was in the workplace setting, and they were observing her, living her faith out, and working in an honorable way, and they decided they wanted what she had. And she just found out about that last Saturday. After all these years, that lady gave her life to the Lord because she wanted what Linda had. That's what this is about. So it's telling us what is the way that we work, the way that we serve. Well, respecting the authority of the person over you. So even if you don't snap at them, you don't be rude to them, you don't go around talking behind their back, you don't go trying to undermine them. You show respect for their authority. Now, for me, I don't know. This has not been a big challenge in my life because in the day and age I lived in, we were taught a work ethic. I had 1 year as a Cub Scout, and I don't even know if I did the whole thing, but it was that framework and some instruction of living honorably and working honorably and that sort of thing. It was taught to me. We had a neighbor that was a veteran, and he would influence me and others that were older than me. That of course, when in my generation, much of the previous generation were all veterans of World War II and even some World War I's. When I was young, but World War II especially, and the Korean War, and then some Vietnam, but especially that older generation, served, many of them, and I had a lot of that influence, and that might have been part. But I was in sports, and we were taught to respect the coach, and then I went in the Army at 17 years old, and you were emphatically taught to respect the rank. And they told us, it doesn't matter if you respect the man or the woman, you respect the rank. And that's a principle. And I think that's helpful because it's really the same thing the Apostle Paul's saying. You respect their position. even if you don't respect them. I have worked for people that were mean, underhanded, doing, things to make my life miserable. Cheating me and being unfair to me, different ones at different times. And I didn't do anything to undermine them. I prayed, Lord, help me. And I watched God just do amazing things. I had one guy, I haven't told this story for a long time, but I always described it like he took me out to the edge of the cliff. He walked me out there. He held me over the edge of the cliff, and he let go. He was my boss. I was an engineer in both types of. We had two types of engineers in the engineering department, and I did both sides of engineering, and this was the programming side. And he told me to do something in the programming. Now, I was a machinist, and what he told me, I'll just tell you very quickly, was we had a kind of a principle. It was an unwritten rule. And that was machinists understood it as the people who have to experience a program somebody else plugs in, and then that machine, after you load the tools, it takes off and runs according to that program. Now, we thought it was fast. The one machine, all the machines until we got the Ozarks, the rapid speed to get from in rapid mode, not feed mode, was 200 inches a minute. And that's fast. The Ozarks went 2,000 inches a minute in rapid mode. And our unwritten rule was that you would wrap it over, wrap it down to an inch above the part, and then you go into a fast feed mode, and then you go into the cutting feed mode. And it was just for the peace of mind of the operator who's at the mercy of the program. If you program it wrong, you had a crash. Well, for you, it's like, I made a crash. Blew up that tool worth hundreds of dollars, messed up that part, maybe destroyed a fixture. But you're not thinking about the human factor of the guy who just about wet his pants when he experienced the explosion of that part just going up. I had one fellow programmer, and the manager adopted this attitude. He said, an inch is as good as a mile. I said, don't wrap it at a diagonal across. I know it'll save you half a second, not even half a second. Don't wrap it across all those clamps and everything, and 1,000th of an inch. Do you know what 1,000th of an inch is? If you take a piece of paper and slice it in the thickness of it, not cut it, but slice the thickness of the paper about 15 or 16 times, each one of those is 1,000th of an inch. And that's what I dealt with as a machinist, thousandths of an inch and tenths of a thousandth of an inch when you're doing grinding and stuff. Well, he said 1,000th of an inch. If you miss it, and that's true, isn't it? If you miss it by 1,000th of an inch, it's no different than missing it by a mile. You missed it. But you cause great distress to the operator out there. And they didn't appreciate that. Programmer doing that, and I'd get on to him because I was a machinist before I went into the engineering department. But my boss had told me, and this was a different thing, but to do something along those kind of lines. And I'm like, you will have rebellion in the ranks. You will have every machinist and all the union guys in here having a fit. You don't want to do that. I don't want to do it, but I'm telling you, you don't want to tell me to do that. He says, I don't care. You do it. So I did it. Under his orders, I had to do it. I was respectful, saying, you don't, I didn't say it like, you're being a jerk, you don't want, I was saying, listen, you don't want to do that. You will cause all kinds, like I just said, but it was with respect the way I said it. He said, you're going to do it. So I did it, and they come, bam, opening the door and come in there with the first one that went out there like that. You know what he did? I said, I was told to do that. So they go over to his office, open the door. I don't know what he's talking about. I never told him to do that. I mean, that's literally taking somebody and that's what he did to me. Well, I couldn't start living in how can I get back at him? How can I have vengeance? Because the Bible says vengeance is mine. I'm supposed to respect him for his position. I'm supposed to go out of my way in a way to please him. In other words, to bless him. To do what satisfies his desire. Even if I think I have a better idea, have a better way to do it, I'm to please him. I can offer my idea, and if he or she rejects that idea, then I am to do what they say to do, the way they say to do it. That's the attitude, the heart that this is describing. And I pray, you know what? The Lord turned around and just had that guy, boom, and nobody knew. But he was just a very short order after that. I was like, Lord, this is going to cost me for a long time. These union guys don't trust somebody. This was, the reason why I became an engineer was my disc had ruptured, and they finally, while I'm still on work comp, still in crippling pain, I was walking like, twisted and in agony, with all these wires and shooting electricity in me and these gadgets. But I went back in there and started doing that because I kept begging to work. I said, I'd rather work than be on workman's comp, Please give me anything. I'll do anything. Just let me work. And so I went in there working in massive crippling pain. And then they asked me I went in there to do data entry in that department, and that was when after 2 weeks, they thought it'd take all summer to do what I did, and I did it as to the Lord. And so instead of taking all summer and dragging it out, getting hourly division crew leader pay, because it was a union shop, and any union person that does any salary position, I don't care if the salary position's like a salary janitor or something, there's no such thing, but you know what I'm saying. It didn't matter what the skill level, if you're doing a position, and that was just data entry, but you get top union pay, no higher pay for anybody in the union than that. And that's what I was getting paid. But I did it in 2 weeks. And they're like, I can't believe how fast you did that. It was about 60 years, about 50 years worth of old programs and time studies, and they wanted me to computerize them. They were all handwritten. And I did all of that in a couple weeks. I was going after it. And they said, well, we can't pay you anymore. You're already getting the top pay, but would you want to do engineering work? And I just said, hey, I'd love to learn. And that's how I got started in there, okay? But any union guy that went to work, while I was still in the union, it wasn't quite so bad. But then after a while, they just said, we're going to make you management. That was the offer. We'll continue to do it, but we got to make you full-time company man. Now they consider you a traitor. They don't trust you. We're brothers. My best friend would walk up, and he just turned. I walked out to tell everybody, and he turned his back on me and walked away. And he was my buddy on my machines, and we worked together and honored each other and did things, and he just turned his back and walked away, as if I had any control over that. I could just become unemployed, because then we're going to continue to pay me crew leader pay to do that. It's like you're doing that job. Do you want to continue to do it? Because healing hadn't manifested up at that point. And it's like, yes. Okay. I want to work. I want to do that. And I honored my bosses, but I also showed respect. And I was a great resource to bridge that, but some people don't appreciate it. And so he put me in a position, but I couldn't turn on the person. God just pulled him out of that department and sent him back. Because what he did to me, he was doing to other people. And the company just became aware that he was not skilled as a manager of us engineers. He had been a programmer many, many years before. And they're like, you're going back in the warehouse. He was a warehouse guy. And they put him back in the warehouse. Said, you are not. Because they saw there was tensions and conflict going. Because he adopted like that one engineer's attitude. The union had a way of educating that guy into not continuing that. But here's what it says. In singleness of motive, in singleness of motive. Make it your motive. Make it your will. You got to will yourself sometimes when you're working. It's easy to work for a pleasant, wonderful boss. It's probably a joy to work for Dr. Hart. But not everybody's working for somebody who is respectful and kind. It doesn't qualify to those that are nice. Singleness of motive, you make it your motive. I am going to work for the glory of God. We're going to pull this out. In sincerity of heart, it's a heart thing. Remember everything we've been talking about lately? It's what's in the heart that counts. And so, get your heart into doing that. In sincerity of heart, as service to Christ Himself. You know the secret to working for any employer? You're working for Jesus. You're not working for them. It's how I've done interviews. I have gotten jobs. I've been put in positions of great authority very rapidly. But I've come into there and said, I just want you to know, I will be the best person you've ever had do this position. Because I'm a Christian. And my faith, my belief says that I am to work as unto the Lord and not to men. I'm working as if I'm working for Jesus, that He's my boss, not you. And in doing that, I'm going to work really good to be the best that I can be, the best that you can have. And they'd be like, I believe you, and bring me in and promote me and all kinds of good things. But that's the heart. I'm working, and that's the secret. When I had those unfair things, and I had the boss over that boss and the other, I mean, he was really a stinker. And it didn't change in that same company. And one day I just kept saying, Lord, I'm just going to look for something else. I had decided he has cheated me literally of thousands and thousands of dollars worth of salary and all this different stuff. And it was going on. And he kept lying and saying, the next thing I'm going to take care of you. And then he lied over and over each time. And one day I just looked at him. I said, Lord, I guess I'll do the St. Louis traffic. I'll go be a programmer at McDonnell Douglas, and I'll make a whole lot more money over there anyway. I just didn't want to be driving to St. Louis and doing that. But Lord, whatever, I'm taking another job. I told him, you've got my 2 weeks' notice. You know what God did? Within those 2 weeks, the pastor of the church, who I had been working for, as unto the Lord, not to men, called me and said, it'd be like, I feel like so strongly about this, I feel like I'd be sinning if I didn't call you and tell you this, offer you this day. I want you to be the associate pastor of the church. He says, we can get together, that was Sunday afternoon, so we can get together, tomorrow and we can talk salary and decide. I said, no, sir, I don't have to talk about salary. No, yes, sir, I accept. I trust you'll give me something fair. Church will provide for me, but I accept. And on Monday, I went in, and I had already given my 2 weeks' notice. It was right at the end of it. And I said, I'm taking my stuff. Goodbye. And I was free. But the Lord had given me that. But I didn't disrespect Him all the way even out the door. He offered then to double my salary or more, and plus give me some bonuses on top of that. And I said, no, thank you. That time has already come and gone. And I'm doing what I'm called to do. And I already told you I was going to go, and he didn't believe it. It took, he hired three people replaced what I used to do in my workload to do the work that I was doing. It was 3 people. So it'd been a good deal to double my salary because he's paying them more than what he was paying me. All that to say, I know that's a lot of detail and stuff, but it's to express the heart of this. I was a minister in my church, youth pastor, children's pastor, and doing over the ushers and stuff, volunteering. Then now I'm going to be paid to be the associate pastor of the church, but I'm serving, and to do that is what I'm called to do, but I was faithful to it, and the Lord blessed me out of it. I always say the fastest way to promotion is to do this. And some people call you, what do they call you? Boss's pet. They have words that I can't say. Brown nose. You like to kiss a part of the anatomy of the boss. You know what I'm saying? All that kind of stuff. They give you a hard time. And I say, listen, I'm not working for the boss. I'm working for man. I had a spirit-filled guy. I mentioned this not too long ago. I'm not going to go into detail of it. But he had been treated that way, taken advantage of. And so his motive, and he's spirit-filled, his motive was to look like he was working and do as little as he could because he felt they didn't deserve any more than that for what they were doing to him. And so he come to me, and he was watching me, and I had taken on some of what he did that he said took over 5 hours, because we had a 5-hour morning and then about 4 in the afternoon. And he spent 5 hours doing this, and I had programmed and did it and eliminated by creating massive spreadsheets and all this detail. And so it did all the math, and it was spreadsheets working off of spreadsheets. It's super complex. And the Lord just gave me favor. I learned all that just on the job, saying, Lord, I just want to serve you. And so I was doing very detailed spreadsheets and all of this out of Excel in early days of all that. And I would get that done with laser printed, nice digital reports that took out all these errors that they had. So it saved the money, lots of money, and company, lots of money, and it looked nice. And I did it in less than half an hour. I'd program the first thing, and those spreadsheets just started doing, once this got in, and then the next spreadsheet would pull the results out of that, and I'd put a couple things, and then all these spreadsheets started working and pulling everything, combining it, and then producing the reports I created, and they were accurate, so it was very quick, less than half an hour. He come up to me and said, "Why are you doing that? They're not going to give you raises. They're going to." I said, "Believe me, you wouldn't. I know." He didn't. I was making less than the secretary in that department, and I was a level 2 engineer at this point, doing both kinds of engineering because I got to doing this, and then they're like, "How would you like to do programming?" Sure, and so I became taught on the job in both sides. And it was because of this attitude why that happened. It happened with me even when I was in the union. I had such favor. I got put on what was at the time the most modern machines in the world. When one of the union guys it was an injury, a back injury, and surgery was going on, different things, and he was going to be out for a good while. And the way it's supposed to work is they're supposed to post a temporary bid. They gave me that job. Union had a fit, but I don't know how they did it, but they gave me that. So I was running the most modern machines in the world at that time, and then when I became a programmer, we brought in even more modern, those ones that I was talking about, and it was a whole new language, and they made me the engineer because none of the other engineers, when they came in to train for a week, when they set them up, could keep up with him. I was praying in the Spirit. Lord, help me to understand, give me the knowledge. I'm not bragging on me because it has nothing. I'm not that. These are computer programming college graduates and engineering science graduates and stuff. And these programmers are out there, and nobody could understand this new language. I said, I can. Part of it was because the Lord orders your steps. I had been a machinist. There is a bit of an advantage to that. And I understood the programming, concept, even though it was another language. And they were stumbling on the only language they knew. I'm thinking concepts, and just God dropped it into me and gave it to me. So they put me in charge of those things. And the machinists couldn't run the machines because they didn't learn it in that week. They said, we don't know how to do it. I said, I can do it. Grievance, You can't have a management guy running the machines. Made an agreement. Every part that I made, so I set them up. I taught them how to load it, how to program it, how to do all the tool settings and all of the different things. And, very complicated, but the long story short is I taught the machinists and I taught the other programmers how to program in this. And so I was the project engineer over those. That's all because of doing this, having no skills. But God will honor you. The fastest way to promotion and success is to do what God says to do in His Word. And you're going to have grief for doing what God says to do in every area of life. You don't want to get drunk with everybody. You don't want to go, that's my one boss. If you didn't go to the bar with him and golfing and drinking all the time with him, I mean, he liked to golf and he liked to drink a lot. And if you didn't do it with him, he was not on your side. Well, I'm not going to compromise my faith, and so I just respectfully decline those kind of things. But, that didn't give me a lot of favor. But when it comes to the job and knowing who needs to do what, the favor manifests itself, even when the bosses weren't on your side, so to speak. I hope this is helpful to you. I had a feeling God was going to, do this, because this is a big deal. It touches your livelihood. In 1 Timothy 1, 6 and 7, it says this, "Let as many bondservants as are under the yoke count their own masters worthy of all honor, so that the name of God and His doctrine may not be blasphemed." See, they know you're a believer. You gotta, it's not put your money where your mouth is, it's put your deeds where your mouth is. That's what Linda did, and that's what caused somebody to get eternal life. I can tell you, Linda will tell you, I'm sure, that if she had done all the time she worked there for free, to know that one person has, became born again and was going to live eternally, it'd be worth it. All the grief, all the getting up and doing the job and not, nobody loves, not most people do. I like to listen to, they like to talk about the Lord, but they tell some of their stories too. I listen to Phil Robertson's podcast and Uncle Si's podcast, and they talk about the Lord, but it's so funny to listen to them. And those guys love their work. They love to work there because it was a great place to work. And yet, if you ever watch Duck Dynasty or listen to that, they're like, "Well, I ain't working for free," Nobody just absolutely loves it unless you're self-employed doing what you just love to do, and you got people working for you to do that. But then, being the boss ain't easy. And so we do it as unto the Lord and everything. Okay, so that God's not blasphemy. We don't want to give God a bad reputation. Verse 2, "And those who have believing masters," so those of you that are fortunate enough to have an employer or a master in the context as a bondservant in that time, those of you that are fortunate to have believing masters, let them not despise them because they're brethren, but rather serve them because those who are benefited are believers and beloved. Paul says, teach and exhort these things. So if you're a believing master, you treat that employee like a brother and not like a piece of dirt. And I can tell you, whether that person under you, especially if they're believers and it's a mutual thing, you certainly want to do it. But if you treat people with respect, you'll get more productivity and more success out of that. Working with them. It's the whole concept, and maybe this is how to tie. Pastor, that was a lot of detail. I just want you to say, I understand. You're a preacher. You don't get it. I have worked half of the time I've been a minister in secular work, and I'm fixing to probably have to do that again right away. Every time I say that, God's come through, but we're in a time where it's like, okay, I think I'm going to have to do that now. And so I think that's going to be the way it is. And that's fine. Paul was a tent maker, and he didn't complain about it, and I have no complaint about that. You'll just have to, my goal was to finish this remodel, and by God's grace, I've been able to do that. But it may be time for that, for a season till we grow, changes unless something happens. We'll see. He's always come through, and it's like, stay full time. But I can tell you, it works. I've lived it. And so when I was talking about how you can make that go over and then down and then go in there, and the operator knows where it's going to go, and he's more comfortable. It just gives you a good relationship with that guy. You don't have to do that. It doesn't affect the grand scheme of things. But if an operator's setting up and you program a way that's going across, number one, you assume that clamp is going to be right there, because we have to design and draw it on CAD and figure where every clamp is and how thick. But if there's something under that, or it just not right, and you figured something wrong, 1,000th's as good as a mile the wrong way too. Kaboom. So why not go above? The operator's more comfortable, but if you're doing the other, they're putting that machine in 1% and just trying to creep across, because they don't know where it's going, because that Mazak that I said, 2,000 inches a minute, it would lift the pallet up, spin that fixture, at the same time it's going across the tooling and do that. And that was for speed, and I tell you, when you do it, it does it. But when I programmed in that language, the operators got to where they could understand that, and we could work that out. This works. I can tell you, several of you have, a couple of you were here, several of you may have heard this, so I'm not going to go into detail, but I've had 3 secular jobs here. Each one ended, and so I believe God used that, because I told people, you watch, I can go in there, and I'll be Ray, Christian Ray, not Pastor Ray. I'm just going in as an employee, not in the ministry. I'm just being hired to be an employee. And to make it very fast, went from, and I said, you watch, I'll be the favor of God, promotion comes from the Lord, and by living the word out, you watch, God's going to promote me, He's going to bless me. And I went in and had promotions immediately, and favor manifested. I'm not going to get into all the details, but 6 months in, I was the plant manager. And I went from hiring in $7.11 an hour to $60,000 salary with an apology of how low the salary was. And how once because I spearheaded a whole change we tore machines out, we relayed out the whole plant and made it productive, because they said we're going to shut it down if we can't make this a less than a 12-hour engine. We had 21 man hours in each engine. Said we can't compete for less than 12. And in one pass, we worked hard at it, did it. We went down to a 10.5-hour engine. And so once the money was going to start flowing in, he was going to adjust that salary massively. Plus, he was a worldly guy. He says, I believe in big rear-end bonuses. He didn't say it like that. And so, but he was apologizing and giving me that promise for $60,000. And that's a pretty good salary here in the Ozarks. Not bad. Pretty nice. And Lisa enjoyed it for the short time, but then the job ended. Former CEO sabotaged it. I go to another company, and I said, okay, just so you know, because I told people, I said I could be made a foreman, I could become a line supervisor, I could be running that place. That's the God we serve. And 6 months later, did I say that before? And I went in, and I was the plant manager. I'm driving home from the plant. The CEO over the corporation tested me. I didn't know he was testing me. I was doing this, going out of my way, reading books, studying something I had never learned in engineering. It was a new concept. Studied it, did all this value stream mapping, drew it. It looked like artwork, hanging on all the walls of every department. I value streamed them all and how we could rearrange things. And he called me on the way and said, I'd like you to run the place. And that was another one. We'll talk about salary on Monday. I said, yes, sir, I'll do that. Yeah, it's better than letting the plant shut down. It's like, we need somebody to implement what you've shown possible. Let's do it. I said, okay. And that's when the next day I went in and he said, I'm going to give you this money. And I'm sorry because we've been running so in debt because of the 20-something hour engine, and we're on the verge of this. This is all I can do, and I apologize. Well, Lisa, she didn't feel like an apology was necessary for the short time. I went to the next job, and the first day I went in, said, we want you to run the place. $45,000. That was a smaller company, but $45,000 a year. And then that one ended, and I went to a third company. And I told people the second time, I said, now you watch, because it's just the way devil, that ended, and you said, well, that was a fluke, Pastor. I know you said that. I said, Christian Ray's going into this second place. You watch God. If you follow God's word and you honor His principles, He will bless you. His favor will be upon you. And the second place I went in, the first day, said, will you run the place? I said, you're the son. I'm not going to run it as a plant manager. We'll call me this, and I'll teach you how to run it. And after so many months, I forget how long that was, he was like, I feel like I can handle it. He was a little ahead of himself, but I'm like, okay, if you think so, go ahead. I'm not here to usurp. And so I stepped out. And so then a third job. I said, you watch. Some people say it's still a fluke. Third job, went in and hired in, on to do an hourly job. And he says, this was October, says in January, we're going to turn the plant over to you. But for now, we're going to have you do this. And so once they turned it over to me, I was making $40,000 a year or so there. Now, all those salaries are pretty good salaries in the Ozarks. And I'm only saying that not to brag, because the only person I can brag on is God. Because I said, you watch. This is what God can do. Because I hired for $7.11 in the first job. That's not $60,000 a year. $7.11 is not that much. But if you figure $60,000 a year and you divide it, and I know I worked more than 40 hours a week, but that's like 30-something an hour. It's a little bit different. The second job, whatever that is, I hired in, though, for $10.50 an hour. And then the third job, I hired in saying, I'll do it. I won't do it. They wanted to hire for a smaller amount, but I said I won't do it for less than 14, I think it was, and they said, okay. But then in January, they made me salary. And so 3 times in a row, in the Ozarks, people say, you don't get it. You don't understand. This is the Ozarks. I said, He's God in the Ozarks like He is anywhere else. And Jane was here to hear me say those confessions that this will happen. You watch. And Linda and Jane, you look at them and see if they're not nodding. Did that not happen as I said it would? 3 jobs, 3 times, running the place. At a good salary for each of those locations. For what their income levels were. God's good. But it's about the heart, and you got to get your heart in it. If you have the attitude, well, I'm sitting on the outside, but I'm standing on the inside, like Dr. Dobson talks about the rebellious kid, and the parent said, you sit down in that timeout chair, and don't you get up, and that kid said, well, I'm sitting on the outside, but I'm standing on the inside. Told his mom and dad that. That's not what this is telling us, is it? Is this helpful to you tonight? To reinforce that, in verse 6 and 7, Paul goes on to say, we're back to Ephesians 6, he says, not with eye service, not to be seen. You do this not just when you're being watched, not just when, Linda didn't even know she's being watched. We do this as unto the Lord, which means at all times. I'm working for Jesus. So I don't wait, because Jesus always watches me. I want to give Him glory. So, but as bondservants of Christ, you're a bondservant not to that master, however good or bad they are. You're a bondservant to Christ. And that's the secret to success in working. The favor of the Lord will be with you. Again, the emphasis in verse 6, Doing the will of God from the heart. It's the will of God for you to do what I'm talking about doing. He said it. Do this as unto Christ. Paul said, remember in 1 Timothy 6 and 7, did I finish by saying, teach and exhort these things. You probably read it. I don't know that I mentioned it. He says, teach and exhort what I'm talking to you about. And that's why the Holy Spirit's having me take the time to emphasize this. People need to be taught and exhorted to do this. In the Ozarks, and I can tell you, I have had observation of some levels of laziness. Now, it's everywhere I've ever been, but I have seen a spirit of that when I moved into the Ozarks. I'm not talking about just West Plains. When I moved into Branson, we'd have people that we hired to come in and do jobs, and they wouldn't show up. They might come in at noon and say, well, it was a good morning to go fishing. Or, no, they come in that just took Monday off. Every Monday. I had a really wild weekend, and or they would just leave early. They'd come to work and be like, man, I think I'm going to go fishing, I'm going to go hunt, and they'd just leave. They wouldn't show up. We had people we hired in, they wouldn't show up for days. And I just took on a lot of work in Branson and just doing it. But I finally had to hire people from Tulsa and bring them in and put them in cabins for 5 days a week to do the job, because they were from a place with a work ethic and some competition for work and stuff. And so we'd bring them in, and then we'd and pay them the gas money. They'd go home and be with their family on the weekend to get the certain skilled jobs done that we needed done by some skilled craftsmen. We had to bring them in after time and time and time of trying to get people. It's funny, some of those things, like laying of tile floor was one of them. I can do that now. That even works better. But we tried to pay somebody here, didn't we? And we were supposed to have a big grand opening, and he promised he was going to get it done. And he walked out after I was here till 1 in the morning working, or 1:30 in the morning. And when I left, he was working. And I guess right after I left, he just walked out. And I come in, and it was not done. And we had to not have our grand opening of all the front end of the building. I was so disappointed. And so that's why I've ended up doing some things, because of experiences here. And it's not just one contractor that over the years we tried. So we do it as unto the Lord and not unto men. That's the secret. You work for Jesus, not for yourself. Verse 8, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he'll receive the same from the Lord, whether he's a slave or free. God will bless you. He's the one who provides for you. And so he's the one that will cause favor on you to bring promotion to you. And that's why I say the fastest way to promotion is to do it God's way. Submission and authority. Respect for authority. Respecting that position. No matter whether they're good or bad, it tells us you do it like you're doing it for Jesus. And the Lord will repay you, whether you're slave or free, whether you're an employee getting a salary or an hourly wage, or whether you're a bond servant in that context. Isn't that helpful? Let me wrap it up for tonight with, let me try to get through, and we'll pick it up at verse 10 next week. Let me give you a verse I learned, and this is what I would tell employers and when I'd hire in, and when people say, why do you work so hard? That guy was like, why do you, he told me, I go out of my way to not do anything because they don't bless me. So they don't deserve it. And I said, I'm not working for Mr. Croson or Mr. Freeman. Or, I'm not working for these, I'm working for Jesus. That's why I'm working and doing a workload, because they would give me more work than the other programmers because I would commit to getting it done. I'd pray over it. The Lord would give me, I could take so much time, but He would drop knowledge into me, insight into me, understanding. I am not bragging on Ray. Man, you must be great. No, I'm just being a believer. And let me say this, a Spirit-filled believer. I'm praying in the Holy Ghost. When I got in the flesh, when I let myself get, the emotions rise, and like, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm in over my head. I'd feel like pulling my hair. Oh, God, help me. I would just, when I started feeling like that in the natural, I would just stop. I'd get myself a cup of coffee. I would sit down, and I'd just pray in the Spirit. Oh, hallelujah. Thank you. And I start giving I have the mind of Christ. You have all knowledge. You created. You are the one who created all the mathematical principles and everything we've discovered in engineering and mathematics and all of this stuff. You made it all. Help me, God. I don't have it in me. Help me. And you know what? He did. Again and again and again and again. I never told a boss when they would say, would you want to try to do this? And I'm talking about in the natural, it's like, there's no way. Everything I'm describing to you that I did, none of it I had. No! I just want to come in and just do this and go home and not. But that's the other side of it. If you honor God, promotion comes from the Lord. He will raise you up. Look at the life of Joseph. So I hope this is helpful to you. But in verse 9 it says, we said masters do the same. No, we didn't. Again, just like wives, but there's instruction for the husband. Children, but there was instruction for the fathers, the parents. And now here, same way. Master, and you masters, do the same things to them, giving up threatening. Don't be threatening the people under you if you've been blessed with leadership, knowing that your own master is also in heaven. You got a master in heaven. You want him treating you that way? For there's no partiality with him. Don't show partiality with him. I didn't treat the Christian person that I hired better and give them advantages and favor more than the unbeliever. They were employees. I gave them all equal respect and equal opportunity to succeed. Now, the Christians, if they follow these principles, would rise up. But if I had somebody that stood out that was not a professing believer but was a hard worker and did that, I would promote them because they had a work ethic. And so as an employer, which I've been, obviously, that's the way you do it. You be fair, showing no partiality. Is that helpful? I had some extra stuff, but 8 o'clock has come. It's 8:01. And so we'll just call it a night. I could give you, man, there's so much I could get into this. Living a work ethic. But I'm going to tell you, I know there's not a lot of us in here, and not all of us are still working. Some of us in here are retired, and I'm currently not working a secular job, although that may change. But whether you're here and you're working, or you're watching, and you're an employee, a manager, or an employer, or a combination. Sometimes we have a business story, but there's still somebody over us. Sum it all up, God's always over us. As employees, as employers, as masters, as slaves. He is the master of us all. And if we live a life that gives Him glory, I didn't read that to you. 1 Corinthians 10:31, whatever you eat, whatever you drink, whatever you do it as unto the Lord and not unto men. That was what I was going to go to and said that I would tell that to people I hire in, and that was what I would tell that guy. I'm working for the Lord, not unto men. Whatever I do it to the glory of God. So if I'm working as to the Lord, not unto men, according to Ephesians, and in 1 Corinthians, whatever you drink, whatever you eat, whatever you drink, whatever you do it to the glory of God. Glory is not average. Glory is like, I'm a former athlete, so it's kind of easy. Glory is the gold, the silver, the bronze. It's working so hard that you're placing, right? That's the ones that get glory. That by virtue is what they call glory, and the wreaths were called glory that they would put on. That was the glory of that sport. And so in other words, it's excellence. It's doing the absolute best you can, and believe God to do in you things that you don't have ability to do. Just believe Him for His favor and His blessing and His knowledge in that, and He will work with you and help you and and He'll raise you up. And so I started to say, I never told anybody, I don't think I can handle that. They'd say, would you want to do this? You know, when they say, you want to be a programmer? I said, sure, I could do that. I never went to college to be a programmer, but I said, sure, I can do that. And that was when, they gave me that book with the programming language that thick. Said, you got a week to learn it. And gave me a whole day and a half before I had to learn it. Put me in the fire, and I just had to pray. And God gave me the way. Can't tell the story. He gave me the way. And He'll make the way for you. And He will bless you. His favor will be upon you. And just like Joseph, no matter how much the world tries to put you down, God can raise you up. And that's what He did for Joseph. And He'll do it for you because He's the same God. Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for challenging us. In Jesus' name, amen.